Hello everybody and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. Hope you're doing well. Today I am honestly a little bit shaken up this week. I am recording this a little bit in advance, so when you hear this, it will have already been a couple weeks since this recording because I'm going away soon. I'm trying to be prepared. But as of this recording date, a few days ago, there was an earthquake in Southeast Asia. I'm sure, heard of this. The epicenter, which means that where it struck, the center point, the epicenter, was in Myanmar, the neighboring country of Thailand, and they are having a terrible time. It's a real tragedy, the destruction and damage it's caused and the people that are suffering there. So I really hope that's going to be better. I hope it's going to get fixed and sorted as soon as possible. And of course, we also felt the earthquake here in Bangkok as well. It, of course, was a lot less strong, but it still caused some destruction and people even passed away as well. So it's quite a serious thing. I may talk about this more. I think I'm planning to make a private podcast episode about my own experience with this earthquake. So if you want to hear about that, this is available for members. I haven't recorded it yet, but I'm planning to do it maybe next week. So by the time that you hear this, there should be a private podcast episode for members. And yeah, if you don't know, for the membership website on Level Up English members, I have many different kinds of courses, maybe too many, honestly. I have quite a lot there, and it gets a little bit confusing at times. But one of the courses I have is the private podcast, where we have, I've even lost count, it's well over 100 episodes for members. So it's basically just me talking quite casually about different topics. I've got a lot of nice feedback on that one. So that's one of the benefits that you can find if you sign up. And once again, that's levelupenglish.school is the website, and there's a members button at the top of the page. But yes, I can tell you now that I'm fine. You know, I was not badly affected by the earthquake, but I do want to say thank you everyone for your kind emails and messages. I did get a lot of people, and it's just quite sweet. It's quite heartwarming that people thought of me. So yeah, thank you very much. I have seen all of them. But anyway, that's not what I want to talk about today. I actually want to talk about something that I mentioned last year on the podcast. And I had a look, and the first part of this episode was 281. And I can't believe it, but that was July 2024. I can't believe how quickly time has gone. Right? July feels like a long time ago. It's coming up to a year ago now. But the time I recorded this podcast, it doesn't feel very long ago. Like, if you asked me, when did I record part 1? I would say maybe 2 months ago. And it's much longer than that. It's crazy how time goes. Time goes by so quickly. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. This episode is called Cognitive Biases Part 2. I gave a more detailed introduction in Part 1, again, 281, as to what these are, but I can briefly recap and say a cognitive bias is basically a way that your brain tricks you, right? We like to think that we are smart creatures, we're quite intelligent, but in some ways we are easily tricked by our brain. And we spoke about quite a few of these in the last episode, 281, and I'm going to continue today because I think they're quite fun to talk about. It's really interesting to learn how our brain works, and maybe knowing these biases, we can work to outsmart our brain. You know, we can get smarter and become better at learning, better at living, all that kind of stuff. Maybe. And I think, of course, with each one, there's a strong connection to learning and language learning as well. So they'll be relevant in a few different ways here. So I'm going to go through some new examples today. I'll try to explain each one. There may be some new vocabulary as well. I will also give a daily life example that maybe I've experienced and maybe you have as well. And I'll try to give a language learning example as well. So I'll give at least 2 examples for each one. And I think we'll get right into it. So the first one I want to talk about is something called the status quo bias. Right, status quo, this may be a new phrase for you, but this talks about the current state, right, status, the current state of how things are right now. Right, the status quo is how things are going and how they have been done in the past. Right, so you might say you don't want to change from the status quo. One example, maybe a random example, is the status quo in life is to go to school, go to university, then you get a job, start a family, and you start working to provide for your family, which of course is totally fine. But some people might say they don't want to follow the status quo. They want to have a different life. They want to they want to have a life traveling the world, never buying a house, never starting a family. So they are following a life that goes against the status quo. So there's one example of how we can use that phrase. And the status quo bias is the tendency, by the way, we might use that word a lot today. Tendency is a habit or the likelihood of behaving in a certain way. So if there's a tendency to do something, that means it will usually happen in that way. So anyway, the definition is the tendency to prefer things to stay the same rather than making a change, even if the change might be beneficial. So I think we can all relate to this. Change is scary, even if the change might be really good. We like things to stay the same. I can see this in many areas of my life. A big one is just keeping the same brand of phone and technology and stuff like that. I have an iPhone because the very first phone that I bought, the very first smartphone that I bought was an iPhone. I think it was iPhone 4, maybe? iPhone 5? I don't remember. It was one of the early ones back then. And I don't know why. I think I just heard that iPhone is popular. It's quite easy to use. I found a second-hand one online that was cheap. It was good price. I bought it, and I've had an iPhone ever since that time. I've never changed to another brand, even though another brand may be better. I'm sure it would be cheaper as well. But this is part of the status quo bias. I don't want to change. I don't feel like I need to change because I'm used to what I'm using now. Right? People also feel this way with their work, right? This is a really common one. Maybe even some of you can relate to this, where you have a job and honestly, you don't really enjoy your job. And there's something in the back of your head saying, maybe I could quit my job and I could find a better job. I can enjoy my life more if I change careers. But because of the status quo bias, you are reluctant to change. It might be a really good change, but I think the reason why we have this feeling, this bias, is because things could get better, but they could also get much, much worse, right? And as things are now, maybe they're not perfect, but I'm alive, right? I'm still alive. And because of that, we don't want to make a change. So it's a totally natural human feeling, human instinct, but I think it's important to understand. And here's a language learning example now. As a learner, you might find that you want to avoid switching your study methods. The way that you're learning English, you might be reluctant, which means you don't want to, reluctant to switch. So, for example, you might be spending all your time memorizing vocabulary and not much time speaking. I have certainly been in that position. And the reason is because you feel comfortable with your current routine. You don't feel like, you don't feel comfortable to change, basically. So I think this is a good chance to consider whether we are in that situation and whether changing might be a good thing. Is there something that you're doing in your learning that you're doing because you're used to it, you're comfortable with it, but you might have to make a change even outside of your comfort zone to really see some improvements? Have a think about what that could be. For me, definitely it was meeting more people in person to practice my languages. It's not easy. You open yourself up to failure, making mistakes, uncomfortable feelings. That's natural in many interactions, but especially when speaking a second language. But I think we have to embrace that feeling in order to improve and level up. So yes, one thing to consider there. Anyway, status quo bias, that is the first one today. The next one is something called recency effect. Recency. That's not a common word, but this is just related to the word recent, right? Recent. So recency effect is the tendency to remember the most recent information more clearly than older information. So this comes up in so many different ways in life. And again, I think with many of these, once you hear about these effects, biases, you notice it everywhere. So maybe you will notice this one everywhere as well. One common example, if you're watching a movie and the ending of the movie is really bad, you might say to someone, that movie was terrible. You might say you really hated it. Even if the movie wasn't bad, it's just the ending was bad. So the most recent part of the movie that you saw is the part that stays in your mind, right? I experience this a lot, honestly, when it comes to information. I often listen to debates about politics or different opinions around the world and stuff going on like that. I might hear a right-wing argument on the political right side, and then I'll hear a left-wing argument, the opposite argument. And I notice that I have a tendency, a likelihood, to agree with the most recent thing that I heard. So sometimes I will hear someone saying, actually, let me give a more general example. This isn't true for myself, but let me make it more general. So someone might say, climate change is not a big problem. Climate change is nothing to worry about. And then you hear that, I go, okay, they make a good argument. I kind of like what they have to say. But then the next day, someone says, actually, climate change is a big problem. And then you're thinking, okay, they also make a good argument. Okay, I can kind of see the benefits of both arguments, but because the person who said climate change is a problem, you heard more recently, that feels like it's more true. You agree with that more strongly just because it's a recent thing. So there's another example. I hope I explained that well enough. Another very simple one, if you've made a shopping list, you will remember the last few items on your shopping list more clearly than the ones in the middle. Right, that's a very simple example, but it makes sense when you think of it that way. And now let's go to a language learning example. So let's imagine a student who makes a mistake at the end of their conversation. They may feel like their entire English speaking performance was bad, even if the most of it was fine, right? And this is something that I feel has affected me a lot in the past. Our feeling about our current level of a language is really influenced by how we most recently performed. And this is why I always say that progress in a language is generally quite steady. It's always going up as long as you're studying. But the way we feel about our progress and our self-confidence goes up and down. It fluctuates day to day. And this is one of the reasons, right? So you may have a really good conversation, and then as you say goodbye, you may say, goodbye. Oh, I said B, I meant to say goodbye. Oh. And then you're thinking about that mistake the whole way home. You feel really stupid, and that will change the way that you think about the interaction. Oh, that was a really awkward interaction. But conversely, the opposite would be also true. If you had a kind of awkward interaction, but you ended really well. You said, oh, goodbye, see you later. And the other person had a smile on their face. They looked really happy. Then you might say, that was a really good conversation because the most recent thing you remember was a positive interaction. So it's interesting how that can help. And I'll give you one more example here. So I know I said one example for each, but I may do two examples if I get excited. So another way this recency effect might affect you is when you're learning you're learning grammar or vocabulary, because we tend to favor the more recent things we learn. So you may focus more on recent vocabulary and neglect older material that you have learnt, before. So one example in my life is of course, I focus on a lot of the vocab that I'm reading in books. Now I'm hearing on podcasts. I'm learning this stuff. I'm studying very hard. But some stuff that I studied a long time ago, I have put less focus on. And one of these is really simple words like colors and animals, right? And honestly, this is something that I think is not commonly spoken about in languages. Like, how often in your daily life do you talk about colors and animals? It's maybe not that frequent. I have many conversations in Japanese, and yet we never talk about colors. We never have to describe colors. So because of that, I have forgotten lots of the colors in Japanese. I often meet my friend and we'll have a conversation about the pollution, the environment, about culture, kind of slightly advanced topics. But then when they ask me, oh, what color shirt did that person wear? I have to go, how do I say that color? I have to take a second to think about it. And I think this might be a recency effect kind of thing. The older things we tend to look at as less important naturally. So that could be one way. And if you're wondering how to overcome this problem, use a flashcard software. I recommend Anki is a really good one, Anki. By the way, incidentally, that means memorization in Japanese. So now you know how to say memorize in Japanese. But yeah, Anki is amazing. It has spaced repetition, so it will bring the words back up when you're forgetting them. It's very useful for me. I use it every single day. And finally, I want to mention a quote that I found online. This is from someone on social media called Chris Hewitt, maybe is how I say his name. And he posted and he said, I just found out about recency bias. And I have to say, out of all the biases, it's my favorite. Right, so this is kind of a joke. If you didn't get it, the reason it's his favorite is because he just found out about it. It's the most recent one that he learnt. So that's a nice way to end this section. Okay, moving on. The next one is another effect called the IKEA Effect. IKEA comes from the shop, the store IKEA. I'm sure you've heard of it. You may have them in your country. And one thing about IKEA is they have a large range of furniture, right? So they've got a lot of really good beds and tables. In fact, I got both my chair and my desk from IKEA because it's very easy to see them in the store and order them flat pack. Right, so flat pack just means it comes flat and you yourself have to put it together. And the IKEA effect comes from that concept. So the definition here is people put a higher value on things that they have put effort into creating, even if the final product is not the best. In other words, if you make something yourself, you view it as more valuable. Right, and this has many practical elements too, but I think this is why people quite like their IKEA furniture, because they're building it themselves and they get that feeling of satisfaction, even if you haven't really noticed it before. If you have a table that you buy already made and one of the same value from IKEA that you built yourself, you might prefer the IKEA table just because you built it. I certainly feel that way. When I built this desk, I felt quite proud, and I kind of like this desk, and maybe it's partly because of the IKEA effect. So one other example is a plant. You can imagine if you buy a plant, like a house plant, like this one behind me from the store. Actually, I just remembered this plant on my shelf back here. This was also bought from IKEA. How embarrassing. But yeah, if you buy a plant already grown like this one, then you may not give it much thought. You may not think it's very special. But then imagine you grew a plant from a seed. You put the seed in the soil, you watered it every day, and it grew. It will feel much more important to you. If you've ever grown a plant from seed, you know how exciting that is, and you feel almost like a proud parent that you grew this plant from nothing. So that's another example. And as a language learner, I find a lot of people spend time on, let's say, materials made by other people. For example, with flashcards, there are many flashcard decks online that are made by other people, and these can be very useful. In fact, I also use flashcard decks made by other people. At the moment, I'm doing one for an exam, and for an exam, I think it's quite important you get the exam-specific materials. But a lot of these decks are not always so relevant. They may contain vocabulary that is not that useful in your own life. And one of the biggest benefits of making your own deck is that feeling of pride that you get. Right, so I try to do this in a lot of my work these days. I make my own templates, my own learning resources, just for myself. I'm not selling it, I'm not doing it like that, I'm just doing it for myself. And because of that, I notice that I feel a stronger connection towards these materials. So for example, for my writing practice I do every day, I have formatted the page to look nice, at least to my eyes. So it's got some nice colors, it's got different fonts and sizes, and it looks very tidy and pretty. And for me, that works really well because I know I spent some time creating that template, and when I write my practice sentences, I kind of feel good. I want to do a good job because I put effort into creating it. Also, my flashcards as well. I've made thousands of flashcards myself, and I'm improving them all the time by adding notes. I've also made them look very nice, again with colors and fonts. And it's not necessary to learn a language to do all this extra stuff, but I felt it was quite important because, again, once you've created something yourself, you're more likely to use them, and they're also more relevant to you as well. So have a think about your own English study routine and think about how you could make it personalized to you, and if you can make anything yourself and how that would make you feel as well. I'd love to hear your experiences and opinions on all of these, so let me know what you think. The next one, okay, we'll move on now to negativity bias. Negativity bias. And this one is fairly simple to understand, and I'm sure you have felt this. It's the tendency to focus on negative experiences more than positive ones. And I think the reason is quite obvious. It's because I just think negative things are just stronger. They stand out to us more, right? Because if you think way back to, all those years ago when we're fighting for survival in the jungle, it's much more important to look out for tigers and dangerous animals than it is to look out for good things like food. Food helps a little bit, but avoiding being killed by a tiger is much more important in your survival than a few berries, right? So I think that's the idea. That's why it's so deeply rooted, deeply connected into our brains. And a very common example in the modern world is how easy it is to focus on insults rather than compliments, or criticisms rather than compliments. I get this a lot. I'm very lucky, I'm very fortunate to get very few negative comments. I don't get many negative feedback from people online. which I'm very proud of. I've got a very nice community, so thank you very much for listening and being such a nice person. But when I do, I always remember it. I can think back to every negative comment I've received. I remember what they said. I remember how I felt. It really stands out to the human brain, these negative comments and emails. So as a YouTuber or content creator online, this is quite important to be aware of. And I do read every good comment I get, and I remember a few really good ones, but for the most part, they're very easy to forget. And I feel bad saying that because I do appreciate every nice comment. They do make my day. They do make me happy. But I think it's just the natural human tendency to not focus on these as much, which is a real shame. So that's something to be aware of. And let me know if you have felt something similar. Maybe you remember someone said, I'm not going to give a specific example, but someone said something bad about you 10 years ago that you still remember, but you can't remember the compliment that you received last week. I'm sure that relates to many of you. But a language learning example now. I think, again, we tend to focus on negative stuff. And it's really important to understand this because our perception of our own level is, of course, influenced by things like this. So you may feel like you're not a good English learner. You may feel like you're just not a language learner. It doesn't come naturally to you. But you have to be so careful when making these decisions or these judgments because it may not be true. You might remember all of the mistakes you've made in English, all of the awkward interactions you had, and these might be affecting your perception. And how often do you think about the times that you succeeded in languages, in doing something well that you're proud of? From my own experience just this week, I can easily remember last week I went to the market and I wanted to order some mango sticky rice. If you don't know, it's a really, really delicious Thai dessert. Mango, rice, coconut syrup, coconut milk. I don't know what you call it. But super, super nice dessert. Very filling, but really good. And I know how to say this in Thai, but I got a little bit shy. I got a little bit scared. And instead of saying, my pronunciation isn't perfect, but it's something like Khao Niao Ma Muang, something like that. And when I went to order, I said, Khao Niao Ma Muang. A little bit like that. I got scared and I stumbled over my words. And they didn't laugh at me. They knew what I meant. It was totally fine. But I felt quite awkward because I got nervous. And that was like 5 days ago now. And I still remember it very clearly. I remember their faces and everything about that moment I remember quite well. However, when I think about a good experience I had in Thai, nothing comes to mind immediately. It's much harder to think of. So I have to think about it. I know that I've had some, but I can't really think right now. Okay. See, here's, even just yesterday, it was much more recent, but harder to remember because it was positive. I ordered a coffee, less sugar, blah, 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 all this kind of extra stuff. With no English. I ordered it only in Thai, and that was yesterday. So that was my success, but as you could just see in real time, a lot harder to remember. So there's a good example. So just important to know that so you don't feel too bad about your own level. And I think we'll do one more now because this one is a really good one that I love to think about. And this is called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Dunning-Kruger Effect. And this is the idea that people with a low ability in something tend to be, remember tendency, so here's the verb, tend to be more confident in their ability. While on the opposite side, experts will underestimate their ability. So to put it very bluntly, stupid people have a lot of confidence, whereas smart people have many doubts. That's a very simple way of putting it. And I think we can see this in many areas in life. It's very common in driving. If you've just started driving a car, you may feel quite confident. Like, yeah, I can drive. I've been driving for, 2 months? No problem. I'm a good driver. Whereas an experienced driver is much more aware of their limitations, and they are much more aware that they are not perfect. They cannot, handle every situation. And I think this is partly why a lot of younger people drive recklessly, dangerously, and they get into more crashes as well, because younger people have this overconfidence. They feel like they can handle any problem on the road. Whereas when you get a bit older, you see, you may be more skilled at driving, but you see also the areas that you're not good at as well. And I also wonder how much this is related to people that become famous online. In this age of TikTok and short form content, a lot of people are becoming internet famous for quite strange things. You might have someone just eating burgers silently on TikTok, and they become world famous overnight. Very strange time that we live in. But I think a lot of the content you might see, I'll try and put this in a nice way, but you might describe it as not being like very intellectual content. It's not content made for very smart people. It's like very dumbed down, simple content. So I think a lot of the famous influencers, we've seen some examples recently about people going to different countries and causing problems, not paying for train tickets and trying to, just basically breaking the laws in other countries. And this is what they call entertainment. You may know the specific stories that I'm referring to. And of course, this is not content for very, it's not stimulating your brain. It's not helping you learn something new. And maybe this is partly related that a lot of these people, they get so popular because I do have logic here. Let me try and connect it in my brain. So people that are not super smart, I'm not saying that I'm smart, but people that are not super smart will likely be more confident. That's what this effect says. And when you sound confident, you sound more trustworthy. People will follow you more easily. So a very smart person might say, maybe this is true. Maybe this fact is true. It could be, but we could be wrong. Well, they're not very certain, so you might disregard that information. But then someone who is maybe a little bit less intelligent might say, I have just learnt the meaning of life. 100% this is the answer. This is the answer right here. Even though what they're saying may not be very smart, they sound so confident. And confidence kind of tricks us into believing them. So basically, a lot of people might get famous online, not because they're smart, but because they are very confident. And that's why you see a lot of crazy stuff on the internet. That was just my idea, just one theory I had. But again, I'm not going to say that confidently because I don't want to be one of those people. I don't want to be them. But yes, anyway. It's also exactly why I get a little bit nervous when I feel confident about something. Like when I feel like this is definitely the answer, I have to stop and think because I remember this effect and I think, am I being one of these people? Am I being too confident because I'm not really smart enough to understand? So it's something to be aware of, I suppose. But anyway, let's just do one final language learner example. And maybe you can guess what I'm going to say. As a beginner in a language, you may feel more confident in using that language. I felt this myself many times. I studied Japanese before Chinese, but there have been several times in my journey where I felt more confident in Chinese than in my Japanese. And that's not actually because I was objectively better at Chinese, but it's because I wasn't aware of how complex Chinese gets, right? If you're more advanced, you're more aware of the complexities of grammar, vocabulary, and much more, slang, expressions, idioms. So the more this goes back to this phrase that you may have heard, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, right? So it's kind of a weird paradox in a way where you're very confident as a beginner and you feel like, yes, I'm really getting the hang of this language. And then maybe when you get to this intermediate plateau before the advanced levels, you start to lose your confidence because you're increasing your skill, but you're starting to see how much more of this mountain is ahead of you and how much more there is to do. I'm feeling this way with my Japanese right now. I'm really feeling a bit more confident with grammar, but the more grammar I learn, the more I see, wow, there is so much grammar to learn. It's crazy. It's just never ending. And that, of course, affects my confidence. So, again, I don't know if there's a really good takeaway. It's just be aware of that. It's natural for your confidence to dip as you get more advanced. You are getting better, but you're also just realizing there's a lot more to go. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like you're getting worse because you're not, I promise. Whew. I was talking a lot. As you may know, I talk faster and I talk a lot more when I'm excited about a topic. And today, I love this topic, so I hope I didn't talk too fast. It was natural anyway, so you can enjoy my natural speech if you like. Okay, I think we will say a quick thank you to 2 people around the world, and these people have left very nice reviews on Apple Podcasts. The first one is from Sri Lanka, from Kalharatenakun, something like that. And they said, "Hi Michael, I really enjoy your podcast. It helps me make the most of my spare time efficiently and effectively while improving my English skills. I love the way you deliver content. Cheers to a great journey ahead. Love from Sri Lanka." Super kind. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that one. And Sri Lanka is a country that is high on my list. I really want to visit soon, maybe this year, we'll see. But yeah, thank you so much for a lovely review from a lovely country. And one more now from Egypt, and this is from Mohammed, who said, "My name is Mohammed Awad from Egypt, and first of all, I would like to thank you for the tremendous work that you're constantly doing for your listeners. And believe it or not, listening to your podcast has become one of my top stacking habits. I keep listening to your latest episode over and over again until the next one comes up. Thanks a million. Keep it up." Wow, that is amazing. That is something I haven't heard before, actually, that you're listening to one episode multiple times. I feel like I would get very annoyed by my voice, but I'm really glad that you don't. So thank you so much, Mohammed. That means a lot to me. I'm really hoping that you're seeing improvements in your English while you're listening too. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And I think we'll leave it there. I do have a quote to end on before we say goodbye from Alphonse Carr. I'm never good at name pronunciations, but I think this is Alphonse Carr. And they said, "We can complain because the rose bushes have thorns, or rejoice because thorns have roses." So this really just changes the way that you think about situations. Do you have a glass half full or half empty? It really just means we naturally focus more on the negatives, but we can choose to shift our perspective. Rather than complaining about the thorns, which are the spiky parts on a plant, on a rose, we can rejoice, which means be happy, about the roses, the beautiful flowers. So there's 2 ways to look at the same plant. Okay, and yeah, when it comes to language learning, let's do one more final example. Instead of focusing on your mistakes, focus on what you can do and, focus on that, make that, allow that to motivate you further and keep you going. So we can be a bit more positive like that. But okay, I'll leave it here. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.